Well, hello once again, and thank you for joining me on the Waters and Stanton video channel. This is all about antennas from the past, although perhaps they still exist in the present. Past antennas like I'm using a long wire. Well, what's a long wire? I'm using a bit of wet string. Bit of wet string? What does that mean? Anyway, let's talk about long wires, bits of wet string, and see whether they can still be used today. You know, I've been going through a few old magazines, or SGB magazines. Some go back to the late 1940s, early 50s and 60s and so forth. And things have changed a bit. You know, the long wire was the antenna that lots of us used. What was a long wire? Well, a long wire was never defined at all. A long wire was a long bit of wire that went down the bottom of your garden. And we all yearned for long gardens because a long garden meant we have a long wire. But we never bothered to measure the wire. We just ran it down the garden and then loaded it up. Connected it to the transmitter. Very often we connected it directly to the transmitter. Valve transmitted in those days. Pi Networks, which is basically an antenna matching unit built into some of the older transceivers, which are valve transceivers, or transmitters then, because we had separate transmitters and separate receivers. It worked pretty well. And if it didn't work, then we had to use an external matching unit. We called them ATUs then. We got away with it then. You still get away with it now, although some people will come down and you say, no, it's not an ATU, it's a matching unit. It doesn't really matter what you call it as long as you understand what it does. And you know, the matching unit that many of us used in those days was an L network. It was simply a variable coil, variable inductance, and a variable capacitor. In those days you could get variable capacitors. Yeah, you could buy them easily. Some of them were new, made by Eddystone and other companies. Some of them were ripped out of wartime equipment. And you could get variable inductors as well, like a roller coaster, which MFJ perfected in more recent times. But the roller coaster existed during the 1940s. I can remember using a command transmitter which had a lovely roller coaster in it, and there were many other examples. So it wasn't too difficult to get a variable inductor and a variable capacitor and make an antenna matching unit, or an ATU. Yes, an ATU worked just as well as an antenna matching unit. Let me put up on the screen now the simple diagram of an L matching network. I nearly forgot to tell you about the bit of wet string, didn't I? What is a bit of a wet string? Well, it's a throwaway word that we used to use years ago. It was a bit derogatory in some ways, but it was really to describe the antenna you were using, which usually was a bit of wire slung down the garden, a bit of wet string. It was an admission that your antenna wasn't very good. I'm using a bit of wet string. Yeah, that was the admission that it was nothing very special at all. A bit of wet string, it could be anything, but it was wire, not wet string. I've never tried wet string actually. I don't think it will work very well. So a bit of wet string was really a sort of throwaway comment about the aerial, derogatory comment about your own aerial. It was nothing very special, it's just a bit of wet string. There we are. That's the word that we used to use many years ago. I haven't heard that word in years. It was a long time ago, wasn't it? So we ran this wire down the garden, the full length of a garden. We knew that the longer the wire, the better the performance. We didn't know too much about antennas then. There wasn't antenna modelling. We didn't even have computers. There weren't computers. But we knew that an antenna needed two poles. So one pole was the wire going down the garden, and the other pole was, well, a copper stake rammed into the ground. We might actually run another wire, a counterpoise, we called it then, still call them counterpoises. Ran a counterpoise down the garden. That was the other pole. Never quite knew whether it improve things. We kidded ourselves that it improved things, but the only way we could tell whether the antenna was an improvement or not was to try it on the air, and that was really how we operated, most of us anyway, suck it and see. And how did we actually know when the antenna matching unit, or ATU, dare I call it, was correctly adjusted? Well, there were all sorts of tricks we got up to. Neon screwdrivers, they glowed when there was RF around. Fluorescent tubes, I remember the fluorescent tube in my kitchen lighting up. We could use a field strength meter. I tell you, one device we had was an RF current meter. You could get those on the surplus market, Wall Surplus Market. They were great. You just connected that in series with the wire and you adjusted the antenna matching unit until you got the maximum amount of current going through the wire. That was great, except that it was all too easy to run more power than the meter was rated at and burn it out. And once you burnt the meter out, the sensor inside, so I don't know, you couldn't replace it, you couldn't get a replacement. I remember that. I had a really nice RF current meter and it was an absolute disaster when I burnt it out. So then we would have a diode and a meter and a bit of a tune circuit or a bit of an aerial, and we'd get a measurement like that, a field strength meter. That wasn't a bad measurement actually, because we always reckoned that the more current flowing through the aerial, the better the aerial was going to operate. In other words, the best match with the antenna matching unit coincided with maximum current going through the antenna. It worked extremely well. But we didn't really worry about the radiation pattern of antennas. Mind you, when we were first on the air, we were on 160 metres. It didn't really matter. But there wasn't much information about radiation patterns. Well, I say there wasn't. There was the ARRL had some excellent antenna handbooks, but we couldn't afford those. We preferred the best method, which was suck it and see. So where did the wet string come into it? Well, the wet string, as I say, was a sort of a slang word. But there's all sorts of devices. I remember the joystick. I did a video on the joystick actually a long time ago. That was an antenna that was somewhat debatable as how it worked. It was basically a broomstick with wire around it, wound round it as a coil, and then a long length of wire going back to the transmitter. And that wire going back to the transmitter was called the feeder. Well, in actual fact, I think that was the actual antenna, but it got a lot of support. I mean, even the RSGB carried full-length adverts or full-page adverts of the joystick. I've got a copy of I think it was the 1960 Amateur Radio Call Book. It's got a full-page advert of the joystick. So even the RSGB were convinced that the joystick was a great antenna, or at least it passed the technical examination of those that edited the magazine. But a wet string was just a slang term. So, can we use a long wire today? Well, I suppose, what is a long wire? A long wire is basically, I suppose, anything that's longer than a wavelength on the frequency you operate. But it's not critical, really, because if you use the right matching network or matching antenna tuner unit, then you can match it. Of course, we have the end-fed half wave today, but that's a precise antenna. That's not a random bit of wire. Random is another interesting expression. Random wire. If you want to use a 9-to-1 unun, you need to use a random length of wire. What is a random length of wire? Well, random length of wire is anything you like, but no. This random length of wire mustn't be resonant on any of the amateur radio bands. I'm not so sure the definition of random actually fits the description of the antenna. You can use a random length as long as it's the right length. That seems to be a contradiction in terms, doesn't it? Anyway, can we use today the long wire, and if we can, how do we actually match it? Well, you can do what we used to do many years ago and make a little matching unit. Or there is a modern device which I haven't actually tested yet, but it's widely used, and I will just show it on the screen now. You can get ready-made antenna matching unit from Yaesu. It's called the FC50. Icom do one and Alinco do one. If you go onto our website www.hamradiostore, you'll see them there. Check Yaesu, Icom and Alinco. And there are others as well. But the advantage of these is that they are designed for end-fed wires, and they don't seem to worry too much about the length of the end-fed wire, provided that it's long enough. I think from memory now, you need to check the spec, but I think if the wire is around about 80 feet long, sorry that's in old money, but if the wire is about 80 feet long, then you should be able to use it on all bands from 160 metres through to 6 metres. You can use it on shorter lengths of wire, but you may find that it won't resonate on 160 metres. Now the good thing about these is that you can operate them on all bands. So you run a length of wire down the garden and you've immediately got the ability to operate on all bands from 160 metres through to 6 metres. What you need to do is to make sure that either the antenna matching unit has got a fairly short length of wire down to earth, or alternatively run a counterpoise along the garden flower bed or something like that, or along the edge of the garden or wherever you put the antenna, because you need the second pole. So if you want to come up to date with this length of wire, this long wire, or this, to be rather crude, this bit of wet string, run that length of wire down the garden, connect it to one of these antenna matching units, make sure the matching unit is fairly near the ground, and then run either the earth side into a ground stake, or if the antenna matching unit is going to be a bit higher above the ground, run a counterpoise. That's a bit of wire from the earth side of the antenna matching unit down to ground or along the edge of the garden. And then you have quite a nice and, dare I say, fairly efficient antenna that will work on all bands. It's like going back in time, isn't it? I'm using a long wire. I'm using a bit of wet string. But I think you'll find that it works quite well. And certainly, if you've got antenna restrictions or small garden, you can run that wire round the edge of the fence or round the garden. Of course, the higher the better. Don't worry about radiation patterns. We never used to worry about radiation patterns in those days, and with an antenna of this type, it's a question of suck it and see. But I think if you suck it, you might see that it works pretty well. So there we are. That's my take on the long wire, the bit of wet string, random length of wire, whatever you like to call it. It's possible. We used to work quite well in those days with this arrangement, and there's no reason why today it won't still work pretty effectively. And if you've had some good results with this sort of system, let us know below this video. Write a comment below this video, and then other people can read it and judge for themselves. So there we are. That's my step back in time for today. Thank you for your support on this channel. Thank you for your support at Waters and Stanton. Thank you for your support. I know a lot of you order on the internet these days, and we do get the goods out very, very quickly. We pride ourselves in speed of delivery and also after sales service. We don't turn our back on you once you've purchased something, whether it be a small accessory or a major item. We treat all sales the same and all customers the same. In the meantime, you enjoy your ham radio, you take care, and I look forward to seeing you as usual in the next video. Bye for now.